I wasn't supposed to find that apartment. If I hadn't refreshed the page at exactly that moment, if my internet hadn't lagged for those 2 extra seconds, if I hadn't been just tired enough to stop caring about red flags, I would have scrolled past it like every other listing. And I keep thinking about that now, because nothing about it made sense. Not the price, not the photos, and definitely not the rule. I'd been looking for a place for almost a week at that point, and it was already starting to feel hopeless in that slow, exhausting way where you stop expecting anything good and just start calculating what kind of discomfort you're willing to live with. Every apartment felt like a compromise, and every compromise felt permanent, like once I stepped into it, I'd be stuck there longer than I planned. Then, that listing appeared. It didn't look special. If anything, it looked unfinished. The photos were dull, almost lifeless, like whoever took them didn't care about angles or lighting or making the place feel bigger than it was. The rooms looked flat, not messy, not damaged, just empty in a way that didn't invite you in. But the price, it didn't match. It was so low it didn't just feel like a good deal. It felt like something was missing, like a detail had been left out on purpose. And then I saw the line. Tenant must agree to follow house rule. That was it. No explanation, no list, just that. I remember staring at it longer than everything else combined because it didn't feel like a normal condition. It felt like something unfinished, like the sentence had been cut short before it could explain itself. Still, I clicked. The landlord picked up faster than I expected. His voice wasn't strange. That's the part that made it worse later. It was normal in the way that doesn't stand out, calm, slightly tired, like someone who had repeated the same conversation too many times. We went over everything quickly. Rent, deposit, location, no unnecessary details. And then, right when the conversation should have ended, he said, "There is one rule." He didn't emphasize it, didn't pause for effect, just said it like it belonged there. "What rule?" I asked. A small pause, not awkward, not dramatic, just placed. "When you turn off the lights at night, don't look back." I waited. I actually thought he was going to laugh or explain it, like it was some weird tradition or a joke that didn't land properly. But he didn't. "That's it?" I asked. "That's it? And if I do?" This time the pause was longer, not by much, but enough. "You shouldn't." That was all he said, and somehow that felt like more than an answer. I told myself it was nothing. People add weird conditions all the time, superstitions, habits, old beliefs that don't really mean anything anymore. It was probably something like that, something left over from whoever lived there before. And honestly, at that price, I didn't care. I went to see it the next day. The building looked older than it should have for that area, like it had been standing there longer than everything around it, quietly outlasting newer constructions. The walls weren't cracked, the paint wasn't peeling, but there was something about it that felt settled, like it had already decided what it was going to be and didn't need to change anymore. The hallway was quiet, too quiet, not empty, just absent of the kind of background noise you don't notice until it's gone. No distant TV sounds, no footsteps, no muffled conversations behind doors. Just silence that felt complete. The landlord was already there, standing outside the apartment when I arrived. He didn't greet me in any memorable way, just nodded slightly and unlocked the door like we were continuing something that had already started. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. Not fear. Not discomfort, just stillness. The kind that presses lightly against your awareness, like walking into a room where something has already happened, but you don't know what. Everything looked exactly like the photos, the same pale walls, the same simple furniture, the same dull light filtering through the window. But being inside it felt different, because nothing moved, not the curtains, not the air, not even the faint shifting sounds buildings usually make. It felt paused. I walked through each room slowly, pretending to inspect things like I cared about minor details, but really I was just trying to understand why the place felt the way it did. "Everything works," the landlord said behind me. Water, electricity, locks. I nodded. And the rule? I asked, turning back to him. He didn't hesitate this time. When you turn off the lights at night, you go to bed. You don't look back into the room. Why? He looked at me then, not sharply, not suspiciously, just directly. It's not important why. That answer should have bothered me more than it did. But it didn't, because nothing about the place felt urgent enough to question. It just felt quiet, and I needed quiet, so I signed the lease. The first night was normal, completely normal. I unpacked slowly, arranged things without thinking too much about where they went, tried to make the place feel like mine in small, unnecessary ways. The kind of habits you pick up when you don't fully trust a new space yet. By the time I went to bed, I'd almost forgotten about the rule. Almost. I stood by the switch for a moment longer than necessary. Then I turned off the light. Darkness settled in instantly, thicker than it should have been, and for a second, I felt it. That small, quiet pull to turn around. I didn't. I walked straight to the bed and lay down. Nothing happened. The second night was the same. So was the third. By the fourth night, the rule had already started to feel ridiculous. Not in an obvious way, but in the kind of subtle way where your brain starts questioning why you're even following it in the first place. It felt like avoiding stepping on cracks in the pavement. Meaningless, unnecessary. So I stopped thinking about it. And that's exactly when I broke it. It wasn't intentional. I had been distracted, thinking about something else entirely when I turned off the light. And then I looked back. Just a natural movement, a reflex, and for a moment, nothing happened. The room looked exactly the same. Dark, still, unchanged. I remember actually smiling a little, shaking my head at myself as I turned back toward the bed. Of course, I muttered. It felt stupid, completely harmless, and that's what made it worse later. Because the first time, nothing happens. The next night, I remembered. Not the rule, but the feeling. That brief moment of turning around in the dark. It stayed with me longer than it should have. And when I turned off the light again, I felt it immediately. That pull. Stronger this time, like my body already knew something my mind didn't. I stood there for a second. Then I walked forward. Didn't look, but the thought stayed. What was I expecting to see? It didn't happen all at once. It built slowly. Every night that moment stretched just a little longer. Every night the urge grew just a little stronger, until it stopped feeling like curiosity and started feeling like something unfinished, like turning away from something that hadn't ended yet. The second time I looked, I noticed it. Not clearly, not enough to understand, but enough to feel wrong. The shadows didn't sit where they should. The corner of the room felt deeper than the rest, like it didn't end where it was supposed to. I blinked. It was gone, everything normal again. But something had shifted, not in the room, in me. After that, I started looking on purpose, not every night, but enough, and each time it became clearer. Not visible, but closer, like something was learning how to exist in that space, or maybe learning how to be seen. Then one night, I saw it. I turned off the light and looked back immediately. No hesitation, no delay, and there it was. A shape in the corner. Too tall, too still, darker than everything around it in a way that didn't make sense. It didn't move. But I knew it wasn't supposed to be there. And the worst part wasn't seeing it. It was realizing something else at the same time. It wasn't appearing because I looked. It had always been there. That was the first time I understood the rule. But by then, it was too late. Because after that night, it didn't wait in the corner anymore. After that night, I told myself I wouldn't look again, not out of fear, but because I understood something I hadn't before. It wasn't about seeing it. It was about letting it know that I could. And once something knows you're aware of it, it doesn't stay the same. The next night, I followed the rule perfectly. I stood by the switch, turned off the light, and walked straight to the bed without even hesitating. I didn't give myself time to think, didn't let that pull build up in my chest. I just moved, quickly and deliberately, like I could outrun the feeling if I didn't slow down enough to notice it. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. Nothing happened, but I didn't feel better, because the silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied. That was the first change. Before, the room had felt still. Now it felt watched, not in a dramatic way, not like something was breathing down my neck or moving around me, but in a quieter, more suffocating way, like the space itself had shifted from neutral to aware. I told myself it was just my mind reacting to what I'd seen, that once you notice something like that, you can't unnotice it. But the feeling didn't fade, it stayed. And then came the second change. It started small, so small I almost ignored it. The next morning, while brushing my teeth, I caught my reflection in the mirror and froze for just a second. Not because anything was wrong, but because something felt delayed. It was barely noticeable, like my reflection had taken a fraction of a second longer to match my movement. I leaned closer, watching carefully. Everything looked normal. I moved my hand. The reflection followed. Perfectly. I stood there for a moment longer, trying to convince myself I had imagined it, that my brain was just connecting things that didn't belong together. Eventually, I laughed it off, but the thought stayed. That night, I didn't want to go to bed, not because I was afraid of the dark, but because I was starting to feel like the rule didn't end when the lights went off. I kept noticing things, small things, unimportant things, the kind you can always explain if you try hard enough. A shadow in the corner of my eye that disappeared too quickly. A reflection in the window that didn't quite match the angle I was standing at. A feeling, sometimes, that I had already moved, before I actually did. None of it was enough on its own, but together, it started to build something. A few days later, I tried something I probably shouldn't have. I wanted to test it, not the rule. The feeling, that sense that something was sinking with me. That night, I stood by the light switch longer than usual. I didn't turn it off immediately. Instead, I looked straight ahead at the far wall, focusing on a small mark near the corner, something insignificant that gave me a fixed point to anchor myself to. Then, I slowly reached for the switch. And instead of flipping it quickly, I paused halfway. Just enough to create a delay, a break in the motion, like I was waiting for something to catch up. Nothing happened, so I turned off the light completely. Darkness filled the room, and for the first time, I didn't move. I stood there, still, listening, waiting, my eyes fixed forward, refusing to turn, but my awareness stretching behind me, trying to feel something without seeing it. Seconds passed, maybe longer, and then I felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, just presence. Closer than before, much closer. So close that it didn't feel like it was behind me anymore. It felt like it was standing exactly where I had just been. My chest tightened, my breath shallow, every instinct screaming at me to move, to turn, to confirm what I already knew. But I didn't. I stayed still, because something about that moment felt important. Like this was the point where something would change. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop. The urge to look back was gone, completely gone. Not weaker, not fading, gone. Like it had served its purpose. I didn't understand why at first, until the thought hit me, slow and heavy, settling into place with a kind of certainty I couldn't shake. It didn't need me to look anymore. I went to bed that night without turning around, and I didn't sleep. The next morning, I noticed it immediately. The reflection. I was standing in front of the mirror again, brushing my teeth, trying to ignore the way my thoughts had been circling the same realization over and over. And then I saw it. Not a delay this time, not subtle. My reflection blinked. Before I did, I froze instantly. Toothpaste still in my mouth, my hand mid-motion, my eyes locked onto the mirror as my brain tried to process what I had just seen. Slowly, Carefully, I blinked. The reflection followed. Perfectly, like nothing had happened. I stepped back. My heart was beating too fast now, the kind of fast that doesn't come from fear alone, but from confusion, from your mind trying to catch up to something it refuses to accept. "That's not possible," I whispered, but the words didn't feel convincing. After that, things didn't escalate the way I expected. They didn't get louder. They didn't get more obvious, and they got quieter, more precise. The reflection never fully broke. It didn't move on its own again, not in a way I could clearly catch. But sometimes, when I wasn't looking directly at it, I felt like it was. I started avoiding mirrors, avoiding windows at night, avoiding anything that could show me something from a different angle, because I didn't trust what I might see. Or worse, what might see me. Then one night, everything changed again. I came home late, later than usual. The apartment felt different the moment I walked in, heavier, like the air had thickened while I was gone. I didn't turn on all the lights, just the bedroom. I didn't want to think, didn't want to notice anything, I just wanted to sleep. I stood by the switch, my hand resting against it, and for a moment, I hesitated, not because of the rule, but because something felt wrong. I turned off the light and started walking forward. Halfway across the room, I stopped because I heard something, a step, not mine. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, perfectly timed, exactly half a second after mine. I didn't move. My body went completely still, every muscle locked in place as my mind tried to process what I had just heard. Slowly, carefully, I took another step, and again, a second step followed. Perfectly matched, perfectly delayed. My breath caught in my throat as the realization settled in, cold and precise. It wasn't behind me. It was walking with me. And then I understood something worse than anything before. Something that made the rule feel meaningless now. Looking back wasn't the danger anymore. Because now, it didn't need me to turn around. It was already keeping up. I stood there in the dark, completely still, listening to the silence stretch around me, knowing, without needing to see, that if I moved again, it would too. And then, right beside me, close enough that I could feel the space shift. I heard my own voice, soft, calm, perfectly familiar. "Don't stop now." I didn't say it, and that's when I realized the truth. It wasn't following me anymore. It had learned me. And whatever was behind me wasn't trying to be seen, it was trying to replace me. If this felt real, that's because it was almost real. I'll see you in the next memory.